What if the most dangerous person in the room is the one currently crying on your shoulder? We've been taught that vulnerability is a virtue, that the person who opens up, who breaks down, who confesses their deepest wound, that person is brave, trustworthy, human. But what if that's exactly what they want you to think? In the hands of a master manipulator, vulnerability isn't courage. It's a weapon, a precision instrument designed to hijack your empathy, suspend your judgment, and lock you inside a relationship you never consciously agreed to enter. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something most people will never recognize, because by the time they do, it's already working on them. This is strategic fragility, and it might be the most elegant psychological trap ever constructed. Let me paint you a scene. Someone you know, a colleague, a friend, maybe a new romantic interest, pulls you aside, lowers their voice, and says, "I don't normally tell people this, but I trust you." What follows is a confession, a secret, something personal, painful, intimate. And in that moment, something invisible happens inside you. A shift, a click. You feel chosen, trusted, special. What you don't realize is that you've just signed a contract, one with no ink, no witnesses, and no exit clause. This is what psychologists call the reciprocity norm, the deeply wired human compulsion to return what we're given. When someone gives us a gift, we feel obligated to give one back. When someone does us a favor, we feel the pull to repay it. It's not weakness. It's ancient social architecture. It kept tribes alive. But a strategic manipulator doesn't give you a gift. They give you a debt. The moment they share that secret, you absorb an obligation. An unwritten law activates. I cannot betray this person. They trusted me. To expose them now would make me the villain of this story. Think about that structure for a moment. They have handed you a burden, their secret, their pain, their shame. And by accepting it, you've accepted the responsibility of protecting them. You didn't ask for it, but it's yours now. The Socratic tradition taught us to examine the unspoken premises behind our beliefs. So let's examine this one. Why do you believe you owe silence to someone who volunteered information you didn't request? Ask that question, and the architecture of the trap begins to crack. Because what masquerades as intimacy is often something colder, a calculated transfer of loyalty, disguised as an act of love. Here's where it gets darker. In a genuine exchange of ideas, a real conversation between equals, both parties retain their autonomy. You can push back. You can disagree. You can walk away and your judgment remains intact. But once the vulnerability card has been played, that equilibrium collapses. The honest party, the one who confessed, who wept, who revealed, has now accumulated emotional leverage. And leverage, by definition, is power. Consider what happens when you try to criticize them afterward. Maybe they said something unfair. Maybe their behavior was erratic. Maybe you saw something that concerned you. But now, you can't say anything. Because in the back of your mind, you're holding their secret. You're inside their pain. To challenge them feels like a betrayal. To distance yourself feels like abandonment. To report their behavior feels like cruelty. What looked like an exchange of trust has become a hostage situation. Except the hostage isn't a person. It's your own judgment. This is the genius of the mechanism. The manipulator never has to threaten you. They don't need to. The threat is internal. You become your own enforcer. Your empathy, the very best part of you, becomes the lock on your own cage. Nietzsche wrote about the slave morality, the way the weak invert power dynamics by weaponizing guilt and pity. He was onto something that predates him by millennia. The strategic display of suffering is not new. What is new is how invisible it's become in an age that worships emotional transparency as the highest form of authenticity. We've built a culture where being vulnerable is the premium currency of connection. And wherever there is a premium currency, there will be counterfeiters. The question you must learn to ask is not, is this person hurting? But what is this person's pain asking me to do? And did I actually agree to do it? Now zoom out. Because this doesn't only happen in personal relationships. It happens in boardrooms. It happens on campaign stages. It happens in press conferences and viral podcast appearances and carefully crafted memoirs released 3 months before an election. In the corporate world, consider the CEO who steps in front of shareholders after a catastrophic quarter, not with a recovery plan, but with a confessional monologue about their difficult childhood, their burnout, their imposter syndrome. Watch the room. Watch the journalists. Something softens. Suddenly the conversation isn't about fiduciary failure. It's about human struggle. The vulnerability has reframed the story, shifted the moral axis, and bought time that competence alone could not. This is what we might call the transparency tax, the toll you pay when someone's performed openness demands your sympathy in exchange for your scrutiny. In politics, it is nearly endemic. The strategic admission, the affair, the addiction, the family tragedy, deployed at precisely the right moment, is one of the oldest tools in the electoral arsenal. Not because voters are stupid, but because the architecture of empathy is older than democracy. When someone bleeds in public, something primal in us says, protect them. And the political strategist who understands that reflex will always know when to trigger it. The fatigued public, exhausted by spin, by jargon, by polished insincerity, has developed a deep hunger for realness. And the most sophisticated manipulators have learned to manufacture realness on demand. They give you the performance of authenticity. And authenticity, in our current moment, is the one thing that disarms critical thinking faster than almost anything else. Socrates, famously, claimed to know nothing. His method, the elenchus, was to ask questions until the assumed knowledge of his interlocutor collapsed under its own weight. Apply that method here. When a public figure confesses to you, what, exactly, are they asking you to stop doing? What question disappears from the room the moment your heart opens? That is the question worth sitting with. So what do you do with this? First, separate the person from the performance. This is not about becoming cold. Compassion is not the enemy here. The enemy is compelled compassion, empathy that has been manufactured and deployed to override your reason. Real compassion can coexist with clear-eyed analysis. The Stoics understood this. You can feel for someone without surrendering your judgment to them. Second, ask the timing question. Strategic vulnerability almost always arrives at a moment of consequence. When accountability is close, when a decision must be made, when a relationship is at a crossroads. Genuine emotional openness doesn't follow a calendar. Manufactured openness does. Third, reclaim your autonomy over obligation. The social debt created by a shared secret is real, but it is not infinite, and it is not unconditional. You did not ask to be given that information. You do not owe silence in perpetuity because someone chose to confide in you. Loyalty built on fear of being seen as disloyal is not loyalty. It is captivity. And finally, run the Socratic inversion. Ask, if this person's vulnerability disappeared tomorrow, if they were suddenly fine, would my loyalty to them change? If the answer is yes, then your loyalty was never to the person. It was to their wound. And that is exactly what they wanted. The most dangerous person in the room is rarely the loudest. It is rarely the most aggressive, the most threatening, the most obviously powerful. Sometimes, it is the one whose pain you can see, whose suffering you feel, whose trust feels like an honor. Because the most sophisticated trap in human psychology is one you walk into willingly, convinced you are doing the right thing. Strategic fragility is not a glitch in how we relate to each other. It is a feature, one that predators have learned to exploit with surgical precision. In your relationships, in your workplace, in your politics, the antidote is not cynicism. It is clarity, the ability to hold space for another person's pain without surrendering your own discernment, to be moved without being managed. Socrates was executed for asking questions. That is how much power questions have. Start asking them.